home bird's snowy wings against the smoke-grey sky. But there are none. I know at once whom we should blame. When Christopher and Thomas Darby, our only twins, and Brooker Higgs came back from wooding last evening, they seemed a little too well satisfied. But they weren't bringing with them any fowl or rabbit for the pot, or even any fuel. Their only spoils, so far as I could tell, were a bulky, almost weightless sack and immodest fits of laughter. They'd been mushrooming. And by the looks of them, they had already eaten raw some of the fairy caps they'd found. I did the same myself in my first summer of settlement here, a dozen or so years ago, when I was greener and less timid. They're not young. I remember eating them. They are beyond forgetting. Just as yesterday the last sheaf of that year's harvest had been cut and stood. And, just as today, we'd faced a break from labour, which meant that I could sleep my mischief off. So in the company of John Carr, my new neighbour then, my neighbour still, I went off that afternoon to thank the Lord for his munificence by hunting fairy caps in these same woods. I'll not forget the dancing lights, the rippling and the merriment, the halos and the melting trails that followed anything that moved, the enormous fearlessness I felt, the lasting fear, yes, even now, or how darkly blue the moon became that night, and then how red. I wish I'd had the courage since to try to find that moon again. Last evening, when the twins and Brooker Higgs jaunted past our cottages and waved at us with gill stains on their fingertips, I asked these merry men, had any luck? They bared their sack of spoils at once, because they were too foxed and stupefied to conceal them, even though they understood my ancient closeness to the manor house. I pulled aside the dampening of leaves and inspected their few remaining fairy caps, saved for later revels, I suppose, plus a good number of golden shawls, which, stewed in milk and placed inside a dead man's mouth, are meant to taste so good they'll jolt him back to life. Accounting for the bulk of their sack was a giant moon ball, its soft, kid-leather skin already smoking spores, and far too yellowy and dry to cook. Why had they picked it, then? Why hadn't they just given it a satisfying kick? What kind of wayward lads were these? Here's what took place. This is my reckoning, calculated without recourse to any constable or magistrate, and just as well, because this place is too far off from towns to number such judicious creatures among our livestock. We are too small, and getting smaller. Our final day of harvesting was not as joyful as it ought to have been, and not only because the crop proved so frugal in the ear. A gentleman we did not recognize was watching us reduce our barley field to stub. A visitor, a rare event, exciting and unnerving. We mowed with scythes. He worked with brushes and with quills. He was recording us, he said, or more exactly, marking down our land, at Master Kent's request. He tipped his drawing board for anyone that asked, and let them see the scratchings on his chart. The geometrics that he said were fields and woods, the squares that stood for cottages, the ponds, the lanes, the foresting. He was a pleasant man, I'd say, no more than 30 years of age, and dressed much like the master, not for labour, but for the open air, in sturdy boots, breeches, a jerkin, and a plain cap without feather, brooch, or badge. His beard was shaped and honed to a point with wax. I have a narrow trowel that matches it, a townsman's beard, a wealthy beard, and he was lopsided when he moved, with a stiff arm and shoulder on his left. His was a body not well suited to the balks and bumpy edges of a